Great. Welcome, everyone. My name is Sam Thompson. I am the Senior Program Manager for our UK Awards here at the US-UK Fulbright Commission. And I am joined by a couple of our current postgraduate students and a fellow colleague from the Commission who I'll let introduce themselves in just a moment. But before we get to that, I wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping. So today's session is going to be on submitting a competitive application and a little bit on the two different placement models as well. So we've got a current student here from each of those, and we'll go into some more detail about those. What I'd also like to let you know is that throughout the session, we will be able to see your questions. We'll have two different Q&A sections this afternoon. So one in about 20 minutes time before Caroline has to leave, and then one a little bit later on. So if you have questions that are pertaining in particular to the independent placement model, those are the applications for students who plan on applying independently to their US higher education institutions of choice. If you have questions about that, please try and get those in the next 20 minutes or so. If you have questions about anything else or the process generally, you can get those in now as well. But we'll also be having a second Q&A session that will be a little bit more broad and will cover IAE placement as well. So you can get those in whenever, and we'll try and get to all of those questions when we can. If you plan on asking a question, I'm going to ask that you use the Q&A system here on Zoom rather than the chat box. So make sure you're using that Q&A, because otherwise we might not necessarily see your questions. And finally, we are going to be recording the session and have already started the recording. So if you want to go back to our answer about your questions, or if you've missed a little bit, if you need to leave early, you'll have the entire webinar available to you to view online later. It will be put on the US-UK Fulbright Commission's website and YouTube. So with that out of the way, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Rebecca to introduce herself, and then hand over to Caroline and Annika to tell us a little bit about themselves.
Hi everyone, it's lovely to meet you. As introduced, I'm Rebecca. I'm the Program Officer here at the US-UK Fulbright Commission. And yeah, great to have you all here today.
Shall I dive in?
Caroline, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, so I'm Caroline. So I'm currently doing an Ed.D. at Teachers College, Columbia University, in looking at tango music pedagogy and transmedia storytelling. So nice to meet you all. Here in New York, sorry.
Hey everyone. So I'm doing a master's in data science at Rice University. So like Caroline, I'm in my first year. I've done one semester and I'm based in Houston in Texas.
Thank you both. So we are entering sort of the last month of the application window. So we're talking here about how to make your application as strategic as possible. That said, if you've not begun your application yet, there is still a month to go. It's not too late to start, but you need to be strategic about how you approach this. So think about things that you can do to save time. If you already have a CV from applying to a job, for instance, you might not need to start all over again. You should have a template to work from. Maybe you've been thinking about postgraduate applications in the UK or elsewhere, so you might already have some of the framework for your study objective written, those kinds of things. So think about ways that you can be strategic. If you're planning to start your application, it might be best to reach out to those who will be writing your reference letters right now. And then as they respond to you, have time to write their letters, you can be working on everything else. Don't wait until you've finished your application before you reach out to your referees, because that's a guaranteed way that they might not have time to get in touch with you. Also think about all of the other materials that you'll need. So looking at our supplemental form on the Fulbright website, these kind of things, you can do them almost in any order. So think about the ways that you can save time whilst doing them if you are planning to start now. Otherwise, think about the ways that you can use the month that you have left remaining to you to be able to put as much time and work in these as possible. The other thing we'll be doing is throughout this process, we'll be going into each of these elements, or throughout the presentation tonight, we'll be going into each of these elements in a little bit more depth. So start with your research as well. You'll probably have already been doing some research if you're interested in making an application to one of our awards, because you'll be looking on our website. But there's lots of research that you can do. So our website is probably the best place to start. You can get to know us and our values. the partner awards that we have, some of the host institutions if you're planning to apply through a partner award, but also you should start researching anywhere that you might want to apply to if you are thinking about applying independently. There's also the Fulbright webinars. We've already done one on a overview of our Fulbright awards, and we recommend that you go and search these out. But you can also watch YouTube videos from current Fulbright students. You can find advice and information from Education USA about Fulbright or about postgraduate courses in the US. There'll also be forums, blogs, and websites, although I would always recommend using your critical thinking with these to make sure that you're getting good advice rather than following perhaps some less useful advice. I'm going to ask our current students about some of the research that they did in their approach to the Fulbright application. So, Caroline, why don't you start us off with talking about some of the research?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I started with all of the Fulbright webinars, and I took very careful notes of everything that was said, especially about the independent study and the fact that it's not that easy to get it because there's a lot of competition. And so once I'd done that, I did go to some other university websites. I watched quite a few YouTube videos of previous Fulbrighters. But yeah, word of warning, it does change, I think, every year, the questions a little bit. That's the impression I have. So even if you do base it on some of the things that other people have done before, you will absolutely need to reread the requirements for this year. And I would just say, keep rereading the advice on the Fulbright page again and again and again and again, and keep trying to reframe everything that you're trying to say through the Fulbright mission. I think that's really important to remember the values. It's kind of essential, I think, to the work of writing your application.
It's really good that you mentioned the fact that things change every year, because a great example of that is that this year we're offering all applicants the opportunity to write a very short reflective essay, about 300 words, that they'll be able to upload in the additional materials section of the application. So this is a new optional essay, but of course it gives you more room to talk about who you are and what you bring to the Fulbright. So as you say, a good example of why you should always read the materials. Annika, what about you? What kind of research did you do in your?
So I think what's important is the application itself is made up of several different elements. And so, for example, the references, I definitely advise reaching out early and making sure those are all in place. And when you're finding your references as well, really try and find people who can speak about you and say something genuine as opposed to generic. You don't want someone who's just going to get something from ChatGPT, but can give specific examples of how you align with the Fulbright values and can speak about your work and your potential for the future. I got 3 references. I used to work for 7 years, so all mine were work-based references, and I think that made a difference in my application. And also when thinking about what you're bringing to the Fulbright program and the reason why you want to do it specific to the US and what the Fulbright values are. It's a cultural exchange and also it's an academic program. So really trying to merge those two to really explain why you want to do a master's or a PhD in the US as opposed to doing the exact same thing in, for example, Singapore. So really highlighting that and highlighting your story. So I really thought about my story from undergrad to where I am now and how that ties into what I want to do in the future and why specifically the US and what I want to get from that and bring to the UK. So I'd say really think about that and put notes down and reach out to other Fulbrighters who were really helpful. And think about the whole story together, because it's not just one part of your application, it really is the package.
I think both of you have touched on some really important things there, both in terms of the Fulbright mission and that grouping everything together. This application form is very similar to the applications you'll fill out for US institutions, where they look at things very holistically. They're not just interested in your academic performance, that matters, but it's part of a wider story. And so thinking about how you present this holistic application is going to be really important. When it comes to documentation, the #1 document on our website, and there are a few that you should be reading, but the #1 thing you should be reading is in our application instructions. There's a PDF for country-specific application instructions. That is because the UK will have slightly different requirements than other commissions. So we have to put these here because the application system is for the global. I want you to read these carefully. This tip about taking notes and highlighting came in from Caroline, and I think that's really crucial. I remember when I was doing exams and such at university and school, going through and underlining all of the key things that I wanted to bring out in a question. Exact same thing here, and follow all of the steps. This is absolutely crucial. When earlier I said that the application is a holistic process, and if you're missing things out, particularly in those written sections, you're losing an opportunity to talk about yourself for a little bit, show something else that you bring that's different from other applicants. And it's that ability to put everything into this holistic application, taking advantage of all of the space you have to write and to talk about what your journey has been, is going to be crucial for making an impact. So here's some tips for those written sections, because there are 3 sections that you're going to be writing extended answers for. So that's the study plan or study objective, personal statement, and our new reflective essay. So here's some advice from some points that Caroline sent over, but I'll ask both of our panelists to expand on this as well. So draft, initially just write. Don't try and structure it, don't try and force anything. Find advice and resources. Plan and redraft, go for a walk or sleep on it if you have time. And then using the Fulbright mission as a lens for all of your experiences and ideas so far. Caroline, I know that these are largely from the notes that you sent me, but is there anything you'd like to expand on in these ideas?
Yeah, just a little bit. I mean, I think the point of just writing is really important. It can be, for me anyway, it feels a little bit overwhelming at the start as where to begin, because it is a complex application process. And sometimes you may find things that you've done your whole life that you never spoke about before could actually be a really interesting point for the Fulbright application. So it's a way of also taking a walk and taking a break. And I think redoing one's CV is also a really good idea to do actually just before writing, so that you really go back through your whole life and remember all these things that you've done. And of course, you may have a hobby or some interest that you've never needed to include before that would actually be fantastic. So it can be a little difficult to get that distance sometimes in one's own life. But I think that's really important, and just allow your brain to remember things when you're writing. And then, of course, you can then start going through and cutting back and rephrasing. I think I wrote 6 drafts before sending the final one. And I ended up essentially rewriting almost entirely the whole thing for the last draft. And I think we shouldn't worry about that. That's just part of the process for me. I don't know what it was like for you, Annika. But yeah, just to get writing.
Yeah, similar. I think one thing that comes to mind is that the study objectives and the personal statement, they're both opportunities to showcase yourself. And whilst you may think, oh, they're very similar, I would say it really isn't. The study objectives is very much focused on your research and your academic and what you want to do after, whereas your personal statement is your story. So I would say try and not have much overlap, because it's an opportunity for you to talk about 2 different things. And also it will be a lot of iterations, but the main thing is follow the instructions. I think I read the instructions maybe like 15 times. I highlighted each bit and I tried to, talk about it. If it talks about the Fulbright values, I wrote down the Fulbright values, and I wrote down everything that I've done in my life that is related to those values and how I can tie them into each part of the essays. And also for my CV, I think Fulbright has a limit of 6 pages. I did a 6-page CV. I wrote down everything that I thought could be relevant. I don't come from academia, but still I thought of parts of my life where I have teaching experience. In my old job, I was a trader, which is very different, but I used to teach interns. And so for me, that was how I could highlight teaching experience. And so I think nothing is irrelevant. Write down everything, follow the instructions, and read them several times. And also try and use it as an opportunity to really showcase different parts of yourself in each essay. Both my essays are completely different. but I used maximum amount of like 2 pages, 6 pages. I really went and tried to get maximum out of it.
Can I
I'm
just add
gonna.
something to that?
Oh,
Sorry, very
yeah, of course.
quickly. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think also it depends a little bit on what your subject matter is. Because my subject is also a passion project, it was quite hard for me to separate the personal story and the academics. And for those of you who your subject is a real passion project, it's really kind of your whole life, you really do have to think in terms of what Annika just said about the life story narrative, which is a word that even appears in the Fulbright text, and then the kind of more academic, scholarly kind of work that you've done. And simply by redrafting and rethinking and rereading the instructions, I think you can eventually find a way to separate the two, but that was certainly a challenge for me, but it is doable.
Before we get into sort of 10 minutes of Q&A proper, I'm going to ask both of you this because I think that in the UK, we're really not used to writing about ourselves in this kind of fashion. I think it's something that perhaps is a little bit alien, which is why it maybe feels like it takes those many iterations, whereas I think a lot of our counterparts across the pond have much more experience about this kind of self-reflective writing or being able to talk about how one's life story brought them to where they are and what it is they want to do next. Um, I know that in the past when I've worked with undergraduates, I've recommended College Essay Guide, which is a free set of resources and blog on US undergraduate education. But I feel like a lot of those same undergraduate college essay application writing techniques are going to come in useful here. Is there anything that either of you use for these written sections of the application?
So for me, I was really terrified I make a grammar mistake, and I come from a maths background, so like writing essays and stuff like that is not what I'm used to. So I checked everything on Grammarly. I just bought the pro version. Any errors, I made sure grammatical. I made sure that I was referencing, so I quoted some statistics. I made sure that they were referenced properly. I made sure that if I was in terms of my project, I wanted to explain, you know, how it's been researched currently. And so if I took a quote, I made sure that it was quoted and there's no plagiarism. And Grammarly has all these checks. And so I use that thoroughly. And I highly recommend just paying for the premium version for like a month or 2 months, because honestly, without it, I'm sure I would have let a mistake, and it really will let you down if you have a grammar mistake in your CV or either of your essays.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm lucky. I've also been working as an English teacher for years, so I'm used to helping people work for exams and have to write essays for that. And that's partly why you see in this list things like synonyms. And so that's like, again, going back to the values and the vocabulary and Fulbright and thinking, how can I reword this and rework this in ways that fit my own life? So, I mean, definitely, you know, like we've all been saying, highlight the words and the kind of the powerful words in the Fulbright descriptions and work with those, and starting sentences differently. You don't want the whole time, you know, in I don't know, 1997 I did this, and then in 19 whatever I did this. I mean, you've really got to, I think, also tell a story and a narrative and be creative in the way you're doing that. So that's also the suggestion for gerunds, where you start sentences in other ways, like having had a great time, blah, blah, blah. And thinking like a journalist, like all the little words that actually don't say much or mean much, you just get rid of those, because the word count, you know, it's important. Like you want everything to work for you to a maximum. And so this idea as well of like efficient adjectives, take words that have a lot of meaning in them that can say 3 things in 1 word. And I think that way you'll end up with a much more powerful kind of narrative. That takes time to find really the right words to say what you mean and that allow you to say it with less words. I think that's kind of a key skill as well, for just fitting it into the limits that we have.
And if I add another like wording specific tip to your list, there is I use the active voice. I think it can be really tempting to fall into using the passive voice, and that detaches you from your achievements and your research. And using the active voice, put yourself in the middle of things and stand out, because that's going to help a lot. Rebecca, do we have any questions that are specific to the independent placement program?
We did have a few questions. I've just been sort of feeding them through. So just looking back, yeah, I guess just advice for the the independent placement model. Is it recommended to speak in depth about the specific universities you wish to attend? I don't know, Caroline, if you're sort of thinking back, how in depth about why you wish to go to Columbia did you go, and what sort of level of specificity did you get into?
But I basically I chose two universities that interested me. And so I did a paragraph on each. And I did mention particular researchers or people who had been teaching there in the past, who had a strong influence on the overall philosophy of the institution. And in fact, I had discovered through reading lots of different research articles, because I was doing a master's before I applied for this. And I found some of the professors at Columbia, for example, were colleagues of professors at the university I did my master's in. So I really did research. I went to their websites. I checked out their projects, maybe that they'd done in many different countries. And so, yeah, I did go specific in the sense of wanting to know in the music department that I was going to, you know, what was the philosophy, what kind of academic work is taking place. And then I mentioned that in my application. Yeah.
We also had another question, possibly a little bit more for you, Sam, asking, is it possible to sort of focus on one program within your application, but then, you know, if you're not accepted on the independent placement model, are you able to swap over to another program that you didn't initially sort of focus on as much?
Yeah, so we know that there's no guarantees when it comes to the application process at US higher education institutions. So you may write about one program, but actually be applying to 4 or 5. And we know that happens, and there's no penalty for doing that. The thing I suppose I would recommend is you only get 2 pages in that study objective to write. And so don't feel like you need to dedicate 4 or 5 paragraphs to all of the research that you've done into universities, if that means that what it is that you want to do and why you want to do it loses out. But also know that if you end up writing about 1 or 2 specific places and then you end up applying somewhere else and getting in, you're not the first person to.
Just looking through the questions here. Sort of again asking about sort of that personal statement, study objective, asking with the independent placement model, would you suggest that, sorry, with the references, would you suggest that the referees speak to the individual universities that you've sort of selected, that you're sort of highlighting, or would you not suggest that as much?
I guess it depends on people's different cases. The professors that I asked for referee letters were people who, one of them had only known me for 1, the other had known me for 10 years. But they were people who had worked or were part of the network of scholars in the universities that I applied to. So I knew that those scholars would know each other. And they'd know about their work and reputation, and also, again, approach and philosophy. I think that's really an important thing to highlight in universities in general. They are looking for people, they're looking for students who are also going to continue their work, if you see what I mean, who are going to contribute to the work that's already been done in the institution. So yeah, so that was they didn't talk directly, but they knew about each other and they know of each other.
Just to kind of flag, sorry, I can see that we have quite a few questions about the IE placement. If you did have any further questions about the independent placement, do please ensure that you get those to us sort of quickly so that we can ask them to Caroline, or of course, feel free to sort of email us those questions afterwards.
Caroline, do you think you would take a slightly less in-depth approach to that if you were applying for a master's rather than a PhD in terms of that level of academic network?
I'm not sure. I'm kind of like that anyway. Potentially, maybe. Yeah, I guess I'd still be interested in knowing in what direction and in which area the professors kind of belong to, because of course your future path afterwards and the kind of referees you have for your next step will then come from your master's program. So I guess it depends on what your overall plan is, and whether you want to go into a doctorate or not. But I would generally, yeah, research the area and see who's in there first anyway.
Rebecca, we've probably got time for one more question, if it's a quick one for Caroline, before we have to thank her for her contributions and say goodbye.
The questions I'm seeing are mainly IE focused. So yeah, just thank you so much for coming today, Caroline.
Yeah, thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you for having me. Good luck, everyone. Bye.
So next we wanted to move on to talking a little bit more about the IE placement model. So Annika found Rice through the or found her place at Rice, I suppose, through the IE placement model. I've just got some general tips here about what I think helps students who are interested in the IE placement model make the most of the IE placement model. And then I'll hand over to Annika as well to talk a little bit about her journey through it. I believe it rewards flexibility, open-mindedness, and strategy. I think students who come to the IE placement model with a very fixed idea of one university that they want to go to would be better off applying through the independent placement. But if you've got either a broader palette of places that you're interested in with the openness to universities that hadn't initially come into your research, or you've just not done a lot of research yet and you really want to know from experts, because the placement team at the IIE are experts in US postgraduate education. They've been working in this field for a very long time. They know the landscape probably better than anyone else. So having that guidance, if you've not had the chance or just don't want to do any research at this stage, may be really helpful. They're aiming to find the best academic fit for you. So they'll be working with the application that you write, with that study objective, with that personal statement, and with that reflective essay to try and find the university that best suits you as a student and your goals for the Fulbright. Some of the universities that you find through the placement model may provide you with additional funding as well, maybe in the form of a fee waiver or a partial fee waiver or some amount of grant funding or opportunities to apply for student research assistantships. We've seen a lot of different options come through as we've been seeing what our students this year have been offered. So there's always the opportunity for additional funding through the IE placement model. And then the US has 4,500 universities. The UK only has about 120 to 150. The chances that you're going to have in-depth knowledge of everywhere in the US are very, very slim. So if you're applying through the IE placement model and you're successful and you get that submission plan through, it's possible that there will be universities there that you've not heard of. Or if you're doing research now to find out if a US university might be a good fit and you might want to apply for the Fulbright, you'll probably find some US universities that you've not heard of. And what I would say is research those options in good faith. It's really easy to bring your preconceptions to this process. And if you let those lead you, you may find that you're cutting off your options too early. You're not going to like everywhere that's offered to you, or you're not necessarily going to like everywhere that you find in your initial research. And that's okay. But also being closed-minded at this stage is going to be a thing that hampers your journey. Annika, do you have anything to add about your journey through the IE placement model?
Yeah, I'd say first of all, the UK Fulbright team, so Sam and Rebecca have been immensely helpful throughout the journey, because I was in the same place where I wasn't sure which one to go, but I asked one question and it was pretty simple to me that the IIE placement was for me, because they help you negotiate funding after, and also I was working at the same time and they deal with all the application. They take care of the fees, they take care of speaking to the universities, and they were very helpful in also suggesting courses. I would have never applied to Rice because I had not really thought of, coming to Houston before, but I genuinely feel like it's the best place I could have picked. So several reasons why. I kind of said to them, I was like, look, I just want somewhere with good weather. And I was like, good data science program, good weather. And Houston is great weather, but also the Fulbright community at Rice is incredible. My IIE placement, the person who I was working with negotiated close to a very close to a full scholarship for me to come to Rice. And like studying in the US costs an arm and a leg. It's an expensive place. And so the Fulbright Award plus a really good negotiated scholarship just makes things so much easier. And the fact that there's this incredibly supportive Fulbright network. For example, when I came to the US, they came to pick me up from the airport. It's just like these little things, or someone will help you move in, or it's like there's these bi-monthly lunches. And so all of that was through the IIE placement model, because I sort of said, okay, I want a good data science program. And this is kind of how much money I have. And then they suggested programs to me, which they thought I could get into. And it's very strategic. So for example, they'll apply for one very competitive university and then one very good university. One, maybe it's not a great university, but it's still a good program. But at least you can sort of get in. So it's they do really think about it for you. And like Sam said, you can do it all by yourself if you're very fixated on one, but it's much easier through them. For me, it was like it was the easiest thing ever. And even the team at UK Fulbright helping with your visa process, like everything was just so professionally done. Like I didn't have any worries at all, and the communication was great. They set up like a webinar call with you, and so they really discuss everything and they take into consideration what you think. I mean, I could go on, but for me it was a really good fit.
How much did you know about Rice before it appeared on your submission plan for the first time?
So I had heard about it in terms of it's a very good university, but I didn't know the detail of it. But like, just to put in mind, I'm also a very open-minded person. So I didn't even research Houston. I was like, Houston, yeah, sure. And then just came. Because I just feel like it's good to have, different life experiences. But for example, as soon as I got an offer from Rice, they set up a call with the dean of graduate studies, the head of Fulbright, and a few Fulbrighters, and they personally welcomed me. They added me to the WhatsApp group. They already were telling me about events happening. And so it was just so much support. And it's not like a one-time thing, it's continuous. If I ever have any problems, I can reach out and 5 people will help me. And that's how it is at Rice. And Rice is it's a very small university. It's only about 4,000 people. If you compare it to like Texas A&M, it's huge. I came here and just knowing that, Fulbright gives you so much support. Rice has given me so much support. It's a small place. It's got good weather. It's Houston's like not that expensive compared to California. And it's just like those things are what make a difference. And I feel like maybe I'm a little bit more mature, but those are the things which I was interested in and which I knew would make my stay in the US more comfortable, as opposed to going for like a sexy name in California where, it's so expensive, and you speak to people then they're complaining about paying rents in like $4,000 or $5,000 a month in not safe areas. You will not have that problem in, say, not all the parts of the US. So for me, it was really looking at it practically, and you will find that it's a sum of all these things which will make the difference. And it's also a very good academic program.
Not to make this too much of a Rice themed webinar, but it's a perfect example for me of one of those universities that perhaps not everyone in the UK will have heard of, but is a research powerhouse in its own right. And also, there are also plenty of very strong universities in California that will have support for their students, but I think it's that experience of some of those places that you may have already heard of will typically, because they have that big reputation. This is not just California, this is true of the East Coast and all over the country. If it's a university with a really strong reputation, a strong name brand, I suppose, it's likely that the support for students there may not always be as strong, because there'll be bigger universities where there's just more students to think about, and it's a little bit harder to, and they'll be in higher cost of living areas, and it's perhaps a little bit harder to provide that same level of support. Whereas for universities that are a little bit smaller, or perhaps don't have huge international communities, there's a bit more, it's a bit easier for them to take care of international students in that level of support. And also there are various parts of the country, particularly if we're thinking outside of the coasts, where cost of living is, as you say, just a little bit lower, and that's going to make that grant money and that support from the university go a little bit.
Yeah, and I guess if I can add one thing, it's like if you are sort of very fixated on having a good name, there's so many opportunities in the US to attend conferences, to do collaborations between universities in terms of if you're specific on an area of research, and you can always reach out to people from different universities and collaborate with them. There's so many events where I attended a datathon, which is like a hackathon, and people from all over the US will come, and you can go attend events at their university. I got invited to, if I wanted to present some sort of research at this event at MIT. Like there's so many things happening, and it's not like, oh, I'm in Rice, I'm never going to leave. It's quite the opposite. It's honestly, you can just go everywhere because people really want to get involved with what you're doing.
So one last tip from us is set yourself a deadline of the day before the official deadline. If you need that extra time, because it turns out you had one more proofread to do, or you're waiting for a referee, you'll give yourself this spare day, which is always helpful. It also allows for any potential technical issues. If you try and submit on that day before, it means that you're not going to get caught out last minute by perhaps your internet being down for the day, or whatever else the case may be. So just make sure you're getting that application in a little bit earlier, and giving yourself the breathing room so that it's not a last minute dash. So we're going to hand over to all of your questions. I know we've been getting them in throughout the webinar today. So Rebecca, if I hand over to you to moderate these, and then we'll go through as many as we can. We've got until 6:30 this evening. And if your question doesn't get answered, or a similar question isn't answered, make sure to reach out, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can.
Awesome. So I'd say the most common question by far, we have several questions regarding people essentially not sure which placement model is best for them. So they have a few universities in mind, and they have some preferences, but they sort of think that the support available through the IE sounds quite appealing. And so they're not sure whether it would be better to apply for the IE placement, but even though they have preferences, or whether that's a good idea, essentially.
Yeah, it's okay to bring preferences to the IE placement model. If you have preferences, that's okay. I think if you have your heart set on a specific, like one specific institution, and you don't want anything else, that's going to be a problem. Or if you're holding a deferred offer and you plan to only attend the university you have that deferred offer from, that would also be an issue on the IE placement model. But if you have some preferences, maybe it's one or two universities, or you have a preference for perhaps a specific area of the country, as you had Annika talking about good weather, or like specific specializations within your academic field that some universities excel at. Those are okay, but I think it's important to also ask yourself, is it a deal breaker if I don't go to one of those preference universities? Because as already expressed, there's no guarantees in the application process to US higher education. So if you get your submission plan back and it's got maybe a couple of universities that you have preferences for and a couple that you hadn't heard of, and it's those two that you hadn't necessarily heard of or hadn't done any research into before making your application that you get offered, is that going to be the thing that makes you say, actually, I don't think I want to do this anymore? Because if that's the case, then the independent placement program is probably for you. But if you're willing to have a little bit of flexibility around this, and you want that opportunity to explore and be open-minded, then I think the IAE placement program is still really good for you, even if you do have a couple of preferences coming in.
We then had a few questions, kind of both, I guess, for both placement types. What we'd advise if people sort of are interested, in several different sort of discipline types, you know, maybe as an example, different subsections of physics or whatever, and they're not quite sure how to best tailor that application given these sort of different discipline interests to best sort of highlight why they're interested in both disciplines, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I would recommend approaching the application with that curiosity in mind. Think about how you can express that curiosity as if you're doing the independent placement program, how it pertains to those universities and courses you're interested in. If you're doing the IAE placement program, how that curiosity can be reflected in your curiosity for US culture as well. How those different areas perhaps you have the opportunity to explore because you're doing this IAE placement program model. And I think I would also recommend thinking about the universities you're applying to. So a number of universities in the US tend to be a lot more flexible than in the UK, even at the postgraduate level, in terms of the modules that you're able to access in specific courses, a more holistic approach to education, perhaps. And so you will have, if you are interested in different sub-disciplines within a specific field, the US may actually be a really good fit for you. Often the comparison between the US and the UK when it comes to higher education is that the UK is better at depth, but we have a lot of, but you can often get like tunnel vision. Whereas in the US, you can often find that there's a lot of breadth, but sometimes you won't get the same level of depth on specifics, niches as you would in the UK. So it's about balancing that. I don't know if you had any experience of this so far in your academic work while you've been in the US, Annika, about that level of breadth or opportunity you've had to explore around your specific interest. Rebecca, are there any other questions?
So we had quite a specific question regarding the Elsevier Awards. So asking if there's limits on the type of programs that are available for the Elsevier Scholarship. Specifically, they were interested if a computer science program would be eligible.
So if that computer science program has a strong data focus, I would imagine it would be eligible. But really is that focus on data and data science. Annika, when it came to writing your study objective, how did you bring that into your thoughts?
Yeah, so I wanted to do a data science master's. My undergraduate degree was so I was at Warwick and I did math, stats, operational research, and economics, which is very much the foundation of data science. So when I did speak to the Fulbright team, it was if you've got a data focus, which I am, I'm now focusing on within data science, I'm focused on computer vision and more generative AI. So for me, very much my focus in the future was on using data to make better business decisions in summary. So I think computer science now, so for example, at Rice, I sit within the computer science department, and there is a lot of overlap between computer science and data science. I'd say a big part of it now of big data is running programs on, Python. And so there is that overlap. But like Sam said, you kind of have to have the data angle, because you can go from like a pure software engineering focused, or you can have how can I use computer science with a data focus? So I think it depends on your angle.
That's really nice.
So we had a few questions just around funding. So I guess maybe just kind of recapping a little bit the differences in the funding available for the IE placement and the independent placement. People asking questions like, do the IE placement people get more money than the independent?
That's a really hard question to answer in terms of specifics, because a lot of this will be worked out based on the need of different candidates in terms of what would help them make sure that they're able to engage in the Fulbright program. With the independent placement model, we will be offering up to the maximum Fulbright grant amount for 9 months to students engaging with that model. So in the past, this has been up to $45,000 as a grant amount. And then if you need more money to be able to engage in the program that you're going to the US for, you would have to apply to potentially scholarships at the individual universities you're going to, or be able to fund that with personal funds. In the case of the independent model, there is, rather than more money, what I would phrase it as is there is the opportunity for more funding. So it may be that your university offers you more money. We've already heard about Rice in the instance of Annika offering almost a full scholarship. That's one of the things that we think the independent placement model has the advantage of, is helping you to find universities that will be able to offer you more funding. Now, not every university is going to be generous with their funding. We know that there's a really wide range of funding that comes back to us from different universities in terms of the financial aid that they're able to offer or the fee waivers that they're able to offer. So it's not that going through the IE placement model is going to guarantee you more funding, but simply that there is the opportunity for more funding. Similarly, at the Commission, we are committed to providing access to apply for a little bit additional funding through the IE placement model, so that students who are engaged in the IE placement model will have the opportunity to apply for up to full cost of attendance if they apply through the IE placement model. If they're successful, this is something that we'll go into more depth on when students are successful in the program in terms of how that works. But that's a commitment that we're trying to meet.
Awesome. Just to recap some of the sort of commonly asked questions that I've been answering in the chat, just some of the very important ones. So the referee deadline is the same as the application deadline. So do ensure that your references are in by May 6th as well. You don't want to be caught out on that front. And then quite a few questions just about those references. If someone's been out of school for a long time, like we were speaking about earlier, and they can't get an academic reference, sort of what would we advise? Well, as much as possible, an academic reference is a good thing, so that someone can speak about sort of your academic strengths and your researching capabilities, etc. But otherwise, sort of strong work references that can speak to those sort of elements of your capabilities are accepted. Similarly, we had some questions about whether we sort of equally consider students, sort of mature students or students just out of their undergraduate. All students are sort of equally considered, and it's just the strength of your application that we are assessing essentially. Also a few questions about sort of gaps in CVs and things like that. Again, would it be they wouldn't work against you in any way, would just be assessing, again, the strength of your application, your personal statement and research objective, etc. Just seen a few more questions coming in here. Yeah, so again, asking with the independent placement model, how many options should people talk about in the application? I know earlier Caroline mentioned that she spoke about 2, but is there sort of an upper limit on how many options we sort of recommend speaking about?
It's going to vary from student to student, but the way to think about it is, how many options can I talk about without detracting from my ability to communicate my research? As I said before, you've only got 2 pages to talk about your study objective plan and what it is that you want to get out of this experience from a research perspective. As such, if it takes you almost the full 2 pages to write about that, don't go into huge depth on the universities that you're interested in. But maybe if it's really important because the universities you picked have specific labs or archives that you would need to use, then that's a reason to write a little bit more about. So think about what it is that writing about those universities is going to add to your study objective plan. And also think about how much of that study objective plan do you need to be able to communicate what it is you're interested in, and how much space does that give you to write about universities. I know that feels like a very non-specific answer, but I think what I want to do with it is equip you with the tools to be able to plan a good study objective, rather than just give you a straight, we want you to write about 2 to 3 universities, because I don't think it's helpful to give you you must write like this. We want students to be able to put themselves and their research into the application and be able to express themselves in a way that best suits them. So what I am going to advise you to do, as I've said, is make sure you're able to express everything it is that you want to do and how you plan on doing it and why you're interested in it and what brought you here and where it's going to take you. And if there are crucial steps to being able to do that are university specific, that's going to add to your application. If there aren't, maybe hold off a little bit on writing about every single university.
We had a question then, I think we'd sort of referred to some different numbers. Maybe there's sort of been some different information on our website. So just to kind of talk through it a little bit with the All Disciplines Award, which is sort of our core award, which most of our grantees receive. The core funding is going to be $66,000 for the 25-26 academic year. So this had previously been $45,000. That might be where some people are sort of getting that number from. It would have previously been posted on our website, but this has been increased for the upcoming academic year. Then I'd also just seen a question essentially just asking about sort of the application process within the IE placement model. I don't know if you speak to that a little bit before we finish up, but just asking whether the advisor sends off the applications on behalf of the individual, whether they apply, sort of get the advice and apply themselves.
Your application materials that you submit to Fulbright will be used to make up an application pack that is sent to the university. So you will likely be asked to provide a writing sample as well, and maybe some additional materials. And then the advisor will handle that. You should not, and I would like to emphasize, you should not make applications independent of those that your advisor is making. They will handle that process for you. And actually, if you're making applications as well, that confuses the process and makes it harder for them to advocate for you, because the university will try and communicate with you instead of with the advisor. And we want to make sure that we're making this process as smooth as possible and giving the advisor the tools they need to advocate for you as best as possible. I don't know, Annika, were there things you were asked for to provide in addition to your Fulbright application?
Yeah, so specific to the university and the program that I was applying for, I had to do the GRE and I had to provide a writing sample. The writing sample wasn't actually really needed, but I sort of preferred to just do it. And yeah, I think IIE basically paid for me to do the GRE as well. So that was another benefit. And they used those to do my application. And like Sam said, I didn't have to talk to anyone directly. It was all communicated to me, and then I just had to complete it.
We've got time for one or two more.
Yeah, probably I'll find a few questions. I can see we have quite a few sort of specific individual case questions. I'm going to refrain from going into the detail on here just because that could be quite extensive, but please do email us, programs@fulbright.org.uk. Over the next month, we're happy to answer your emails if you have more sort of individual questions. Yeah, we just had a few questions regarding our new reflection essay, Sam, and where people can find information on that. Is it mandatory, and what we sort of advised being the best approach for it?
Yeah, so the information regarding the new reflective essay can be found on our website. If you go into those country-specific application instructions, which you should be doing anyway, but I'm always going to advocate for reading those in as much detail as possible, because I think they are the key. If there's one tip that I'm ever going to give for submitting a successful Fulbright application and for getting the most out of this program, it's read everything and follow the instructions. And that's the case here as well. It is not mandatory. It is optional. I would advise doing it, even though it is optional, because if there's anything that I think I would recommend taking away from what our current postgraduates have said today, it's use every opportunity you can and all the space you can to write about yourselves. And this is an additional opportunity to tell us something about you. So it's just more space to make a case for why you should be a Fulbrighter. In terms of advice for following it, because it is new, we don't currently have any students who have written one to be able to fall back on and say, what was your approach to this? So what I'm going to recommend is read the prompts, read the instructions, take some time to think about it, scroll down any ideas. As Caroline suggested, just write, even if you end up doing some like stream of consciousness writing initially, and then pulling the good ideas from that. I'm also going to go back to a set of resources that I talked about before. So there's a website and blog called College Essay Guy. You can find it by Googling College Essay Guy. There are, whilst that's tailored to writing essays for undergraduate applications in the US, those are somewhat similar to what we're asking students to do with this reflective essay, but also on that website, he has a bunch of exercises for getting started with this kind of reflective writing that I think can be really helpful. So even if there's not essay specific guidance on that website, perhaps doing some of those exercises in terms of generating ideas or thinking about how it is that you communicate certain aspects of your journey or who you are, those can come in real useful before you actually put pen to paper for the first, or I guess keyboard for the first time when it comes to writing this essay. So take the opportunity to do a little bit of research around it in terms of that side of things. But it's a fairly open-ended essay. It's really there for you to write about your experiences, your journey, who you are, and we hope to give you the space to tell us a little bit more.
Awesome. I think that kind of wraps us up. Again, if you do have any further questions, I know someone asked me again for the email. So program spelled PROGRAMMES @fulbright.org.uk. Give us an email and we can answer any further questions that you have.
Thank you for coming along today. Thank you, Annika, for joining us and sharing your experiences. As we've said, we're going to try and get this onto YouTube and our website as soon as possible. Thank you, Rebecca, for your work moderating our questions, and I hope you all have a great evening. And if you do have any questions, please do get in touch.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye all.